I think that somewhere somebody didn't do their job in the standpoint of enforcing the laws that are only on the book. I will suggest to you that these concepts of gun-free zones are a bad idea.
Hard to find what could be called an appropriate time to talk about gun control in America. Generally, time following a horrific shooting is spent talking about the act itself. Prayers for those lost and the loved ones left behind. Our thoughts first and foremost with those suffering in Louisiana. But we did want to look at the issue of gun ownership in America. Alan Dershowitz has been kind enough to stay with us for another segment here on The Hardline. Joining us also the president of the Independent Firearm Owners Association, Richard Feldman. And Richard, I want to start with you. A lot of people looking at a re-examination of gun laws after the Louisiana shooter, a man with a history of mental illness, walked into an Alabama pawn shop, was able to buy a handgun. Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal, in fact, said every state should strengthen their laws. Do you agree?
Well, as it relates to uploading information into the NICS system, absolutely. That was the problem here. Our system is only as good as the data that we put into it, and it wasn't uploaded. He should never have been sold the gun.
So Alan Hauser was accused of domestic violence and arson. Should he have been able to purchase a firearm, or as Richard mentioned, it was just really an act of not executing the policy correctly?
Well, he shouldn't have been able to get a gun, but the policy is terrible. The policy basically in the United States says, when in doubt, give them a gun. We have more guns in this country than we have people, and we have more murders, gun murders, than any other country in the world. We have tried an experiment for the last 250 years, and it's failed miserably, and we have to start a new approach. The new approach has to be guns should not be available to people generally, except if they have a significant need. Look, if I could write the Bill of Rights over again, I would skip Amendment number 2. We're the only country in the world that puts in our Constitution the right to bear arms. It's an absurd thing to be in our Constitution, but it's in our Constitution. We have to live with it. But it talks about a well-regulated militia, and guns have to be well-regulated, and they are not well-regulated in this country. We're going to have these kinds of massacres over and over and over again until we change the gun culture. And the National Rifle Association is part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Richard, is the NRA part of the problem?
I don't think so, certainly not in this case. You know, if crazy people and criminals followed the law and we had a gun-free zone, well, then they wouldn't enter it. But of course, by definition, they're not going to pay attention to the law in the first place. So of what value is it to prevent those who don't misuse guns from coming into settings where the only people that are going to be there are those who will? Doesn't make much sense.
Look, all America should be a gun-free zone, and if you want a gun, you should have to go to official authorities in the government. You should have to be able to justify your need for a gun on a self-defense ground, or if you want to be a hunter, to go to a hunting place where they give you the gun and then you give it back when you finish hunting. There are ways of changing the culture in this country and making guns far less available to the average person, and certainly to the average person with a mental illness or with a criminal record or with a history of abuse. You know, it's not enough just to say, let's take guns away from the few people who we now know shouldn't have guns. We have to have a major change in the gun culture. And as long as the National Rifle Association, which I have to give it credit, it's the most effective lobby in the country, as long as they continue to be as effective in their lobbying, it's just not going to happen, and these murders are going to continue.
Well, Alan, the president called his failure to lead on gun control the greatest frustration of his presidency. What has he done wrong in this fight?
Well, the president is not known for his enormous political courage or his ability to work well with Congress. So he's not done very much at all, except to make a few speeches, generally after deaths have occurred. What is needed is some very tough legislation, both on the federal and state level, to make it much, much harder to get guns and to create a presumption against gun ownership instead of a presumption in favor of gun ownership, consistent with the well-regulated militia language of the Second Amendment. And nobody has done enough, especially as we come closer to presidential elections. We find that candidates get more and more allergic to gun control because they know it's bad for their electoral politics, certainly on the Republican side, but increasingly on the Democratic side as well.
Well, Richard, we really haven't heard the candidates talking much about gun safety, gun ownership. Do you anticipate that will change as we get closer to the election?
Well, where I live in New Hampshire, it's already getting close to the election, and there's no question about it. The gun issue is a front and center issue in this year's presidential race. As the professor, of course, knows, he's quoting one part of the Second Amendment, and the Supreme Court has ruled that what it means is that you have a right to own a gun, a handgun, in your home at a minimum for self-defense. The day that we change the Constitution, that ruling can be overturned. Not until then. And if the professor would like to join in what we can do, instead of wishing what would be in his perfect vision of the world, we could move this issue forward. There's no excuse for Alabama not having uploaded that information.
All right, Richard, we're going to have to leave the debate right there. We appreciate the discussion. Alan Dershowitz and Richard Feldman, thanks to both of you. Stick around because there's more Hardline right after the break.